that's not your philosophical mode. That is your kind of like, wow, they said I'm not a great philosopher. How dare they? Right? That is like when you have this innate sense of I, and you're not analyzing in that moment. No, it just comes naturally. It just arises. One gives rise to the next. So we're very good with contradictions.
So
unfortunately,
when this comes up, when I feel fear or embarrassed, and I feel the sense of I, then I should tell myself, hey, didn't you say that you're nihilist? So
very good. At least, very good. At least you could go, well, aren't you a nihilist? Come on, go back to being a nihilist. Yeah, well, that would help in that moment if the emptiness doesn't help. But I still want to address her question, unless this is all related.
I think in a way, because this is what you say, you cannot be totally nihilistic.
Exactly.
Because you have this innate.
Exactly.
Nice.
Yeah, but
that's nice also. Yeah, can't be totally, because every now and then it goes, hi. Don't forget me, hi. Yes?
Well, I just want to make a remark, because the first time I heard about nihilistic attitude was by somebody that told me, well, it was a young guy, and he said, how can you prove me that I am not living in a dream of somebody else? You know, I have no control of anything. There is, you know these stories. There is somebody else dreaming about or creating all these events here, and the people, and we're just players in a bigger plan, and we have no ability to change anything. We are just, you know, like in a game, peons in a game. So and he called his attitude a nihilistic attitude. It was many years ago. I didn't understand. I didn't hear about Buddhism at the time. But I wonder, is it related to any kind of nihilism? Because all the nihilism you talk here is from a strict Buddhist point of view. And this is not the only way to deal with it.
No, of course. Why do we talk about the Buddhist sense? We talk about a Buddhist nihilism because we talk about the Buddhist I.
No, I understand.
And we talk about this text in the Buddhist context, but there could be other forms of nihilism. You could think that, yeah, there's no mind. I mean, come on, in the West we're very good at this. There's only brain, there's no mind. So this brings us to her question. The materialists would say only that which you can prove is there. The Charakas do talk about mind. So it's funny, they're materialists on one hand, but they do talk about consciousness. The Charakas. Not Buddhist, non-Buddhist.
I'm telling you, it's not. It's a.
Sorry, I already got the word Buddhist. Okay.
No Buddhist.
So non-Buddhist, low Buddhist, alle. Low Buddhist, yeah. So Buddhist. So low Buddhist.
A scholar non Buddhistic.
That's right, low Buddhistic. So anyway, the point is here that modern materialists would say there is no consciousness, right?
No, this is wrong. Sorry, but materialists may assume that consciousness is a result of the action of the brain. So it is not in contradiction
in the Buddhist way, in the permanent Buddhist way.
Okay, but I've also met materialists who say there is no consciousness. I've met materialists who say there's no consciousness. I met scientists who say there's no consciousness. So, I mean, in Buddhism we say there's no limit to the different views. So, anyway, whether in the Buddhist way or in a different way, of course there's so many different views of nihilistic views. Of course, there's a huge variety. I just mentioned the traditional ones. Oh yeah, that's good. When you feel tired, you should go. I mean, not to get rid of, but I see some people actually do that, and that's good. Like, I thought to let you know at 8:30, if you want to stay behind, you can, but if you feel tired, don't force it. Okay, great. But going back to this, of course there are different forms of nihilistic views. Okay, and I don't know, whatever those nihilistic views, there are no dinosaurs. God created this world and there was nothing, like certain ideas from a Buddhist point of view, it was not, evolution didn't happen. From a Buddhist point of view, that's probably a nihilistic view. We don't know whether evolution took place that way, but that there was nothing 5,000 years ago, or that, for instance, would be a nihilistic view. So there are different examples. Now, your question was in terms of how can I prove consciousness? How can I prove that blue exists? How can I prove blue exists? So I give you a simple question. How can I prove that blue exists?
Okay.
Ask everyone if they agree and they say yes.
No, you can't.
I can only ask you, look at this. What do you perceive? I can only ask you, look at your own experiencer. What do you perceive?
There is no blue. There is a 235 nanometers wavelength.
Well, how can I prove there's 250 nanometers of wavelengths?
You can measure that.
Well, no, but I mean,
From
what you,
scientific point of view or from Buddhist point of view? Because here it is.
well, like, does blue exist?
Yes.
Color, it's only a perception.
Well, no, wait. No. There's a difference between what gives rise to perception of blue and the perception of blue.
Right.
If the perception of blue exists, the next question is, does blue exist?
Yes. The color blue.
Blue exists.
Blue light exists. Yeah.
The label exists.
No.
Yeah.
There is a
Okay,
light
so
in the
first you have to
wavelength,
agree. If you disagree, then
Convention.
Convention,
Blue light
convention.
and blue is a person.
Literally a convention.
you cannot prove it.
From the scientific
It's
point of
like scientific. It's like
so then there's no tree. There's no tree.
No, again.
Is there a tree or not? So the tree doesn't exist.
No, it does.
No, it doesn't because a tree has color. It's green and brown. So what kind of tree are you talking
No,
about?
it does. It does have a specific wavelength that it reflects back. To call it green, that is your own thing. You can call it green or you can call it George.
No, I can call it. If calling it green is not saying what I call it. I can call it whatever, right? But is there green?
Yes. Yes.
But some people don't perceive color, so what are they?
They're colorblind.
Yeah, but so for them, is there green or not green?
But if for you it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right? If for an individual person it doesn't exist, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist in general.
Depends on
If
what
it exists for one person, it exists.
If the whole human beings couldn't see green, so was it green or not?
But maybe a snake.
It was a mutation.
If there was no one to perceive it, it wouldn't exist.
Right.
If there was no one to perceive it, it wouldn't exist.
Nobody can perceive green. Green doesn't exist. Only green color or green hue or green.
Wait, green and green color are not the same?
No.
But I think
Otherwise, you won't see.
Round shape and round are not the same?
No.
No?
It's
We
the
are
hour, I
nihilists
think.
now.
It's the hour. He's blaming it on the hour.
We are nihilists in
I
835.
think the question is from the scientific point of view, not from the Buddhist point of view. The very scientific.
Yeah, so
point of view,
scientific,
it
I'm
takes
talking-
away. I mean, the observer. I mean, especially in the classical physics. Let's put aside the quantum physics. It means that if gravity exists because you perceive it, then it doesn't exist.
No, and I'm
You need to
saying
be able to measure it.
specifically about colors, I was researching that, and he said that in terms of physics, nobody uses the term blue. We use 485 nanometers wavelength. That's it. No blue.
Yeah, but that is blue. If I ask you what is blue,
But
then
the
you
blue in
can
your
see
eyes. In
How
terms
is
of
it
physics,
expressed?
a
But it's
physicist
exactly-
won't say blue, I'm telling you.
Okay.
That's an
If I understand
Just argue.
One check.
Isn't it
One
easier
Kidding, no.
to relate
So
to
if
the
I
question
understand
how to
correctly,
prove
the answer
consciousness?
is we have it because we
Okay,
perceive
so
it.
sorry. Let's go back to the original question. So how to prove consciousness? Okay.
So we're saying that we say that we have consciousness because we perceive it, because materialism would say you have what you perceive, you have your mind, but that's all it is. Like we're not going to argue with you that you have sensations.
Ah,
and
okay, now
feelings,
I'm
so
talking
that's
about-
all it is.
All right. Well, let's specify materialists who believe in consciousness and those who don't. Because like the ones I met, they kept insisting there was no mind. I don't know, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just saying.
I'm just saying that the way we just went through the courses to see that there's no impermanent self,
Uh-huh.
you could do the same logic
Yes.
to say there's no consciousness.
But you said there is consciousness. You say there is
I'm
consciousness.
saying let's be materialistic and let's assume and let's use the same verses to say, you know.
I'm getting confused now. I'm not sure what your question is. So first you said, from a materialistic point of view, so you're talking about the materialists who believe in consciousness, right?
I think we're confusing the word consciousness here. They believe in a mind, they believe that you perceive something, they believe that you see blue. but they don't believe in the Buddhist term of consciousness, such as the going between reincarnations, stream of consciousness, Buddha nature, not this type of consciousness. Just the color blue, they do agree that they perceive.
Let me just ask one question. So do they think that a first moment of consciousness gives rise to a second moment of consciousness? Do they talk about a continuum?
If you would prove that the brain works like that, they would say yes. If they don't have any evidence.
Okay, so the only thing they're
speak
saying...
about activity of the brain.
Okay, but that is different. Activity of the brain, there are those who say, like I'm just saying, there are those who say there is no consciousness, it's just an illusion, it doesn't exist. We think it's there, but it's not there.
There's no impermanent consciousness, stream of consciousness. It's not impermanent.
It's not impermanent.
It's like part of the...
It's changing moment by moment.
Yeah.
If the brain changes moment by moment and they think the mind depends on the brain, they would have to say it's
Right.
impermanent. So the only difference here is, that they say the consciousness depends on the brain, and when the brain stops working, there's no longer a mind. But other than that, it's the same explanation. It's a continuum. It's a continuum with one moment giving rise to the next with one moment. And also, if you believe in that, actually, when you tell a materialist, they're not very consequential, honestly, because they say it's all the brain. Why do you send your children to school? Inject them with a few things that change their brain, and so they don't have to study.
They're working on it.
Why? Because if it's all the brain, if the brain is responsible for the mind, then we should affect the physical. Why would we work? Why would we study?
The brain
Study?
is changing. The brain is changing.
Yeah, but the mind is
It's
changing.
learning. It's
No, the
learning.
mind is changing, and therefore the brain is changing.
Well, vice versa.
Well, then there couldn't be this little boy who was born. There's a boy who was born in England. No, in England, yeah, called Noah. He was born with 4% of a brain, and he could do what everyone else can do. So how can you account for that? If it was brain over mind. You see, there was a little boy born in Britain, I think it was. Britain, yes. His name is Noah. He was born with only 4% of a brain. Missing. Blank. You can actually see a documentary about him. So there was only the outer part of the brain that is closest to the skull. Why? Because I believe he had a tumor. And the tumor ate away at his brain. He initially, during the first scan, the brain was there. And after some time of maturation, his brain was gone. 4% left. And the doctors told his parents to abort the child. But the parents didn't want that. They wanted to allow the child to live. And so when the child was born, it acted like a normal child. It did exactly what other children do. And the doctors then told them the best thing is to train the child, train the mind of the child, talk to it, its motoric skills, etc. And so they did. They trained the child in terms of doing what's called brain exercise, I guess, like exercising, like doing all sorts of talking to the child, etc. And so the child did, the parents did, and the child learned to talk, and to move around. It learned everything. There was no brain. But then they checked, the brain started to grow. As a result of this training, the brain started to grow. So in this case, the theory is that the mind was responsible for the brain to grow.
It's
And that is
interpretation.
the interpretation of the doctors, not mine. It was the interpretation of the doctors, because the child was encouraged to do mental exercises, not like poking needles in the brain. That would be physical. No, mental exercises. Do this 5 times, etc. Right? That's the mind. Okay, you tell the child, and the child does those movements. Okay, it's not like activating the brain. It's through the mind, wanting to do this, that, and the other. And as a result of that, the brain grew.
Well, you could
That was the
say it
interpretation.
was sufficient to do those things.
Pardon?
Or you could say that those 4% was enough to make him do those exercises.
Well, that's what they say. It actually wasn't enough, because to do this, the parts of the brain were missing. This is like this is a scientific mystery. So this is why it became really famous. Saying that it was through the mental, it was through the mind was fully working like for any other child, but the parts of the brain that are identified, that are usually necessary to do so, they were missing. So
This is an anecdotal episode, famous as it might be.
no, it's not anecdotal, it really happened.
This is
But it is just
saying-
one single episode.
Yeah, it's one example.
This is an example of the
It's one example.
of the brain,
I think that the
okay? A
question
very good
remains,
example of the
Yeah, because the mind is responsible. That's why when you meditate, it's a mental happening that changes the brain. Big time. So it's not that you change the brain first. You meditate first and that changes the brain. The point is here, it's the mind that changes the brain. It's not the brain that changes the mind.
I think that the question remains, we can repeat to ourselves what we're already convinced of. But when we talk with the materialist, I think that the question is, how do we explain our conviction that consciousness is another substance, not physical? This is the point that they don't agree with.
No, because they make themselves believe what they believe, what you just said. They've convinced themselves in making everything work along, and there's no, you see, it's like this, there's only that. If you believe there's only that, right? The Buddhists take in a vaster view. How can you account for a meditator who dies? And I've seen it, my own teacher was there. He was dead, brain dead, but the decay didn't start, and there was warmth in the center of his heart.
It's what?
There was some warmth left in the heart. Warmth, yeah.
How do you know?
Well, because they checked him. And he was brain dead. He was dead. He was dead for a week. It was 90% humidity, right? So there is the Buddhist explanation, and the scientific, they're like, well, I don't know. There is the explanation of you study, right? You study through using your brain, right? You use your brain, you use your brain, you use your brain, you use your brain. And so my point is, when people don't, and then I'm not talking to the materialists, I'm not talking about to the materialists at all, right? Because in the end, even like the Buddha, when the Buddha talks about certain things, he's mainly talking about Buddhists, talking to Buddhists, okay? Well, because the Buddha doesn't need to convince materialists, they don't want to be convinced. They're happy with their own system, and that's good enough. But it's good to bring up these points. The Buddha in the Pramanavartika, he talks about this non-Buddhist view and that non-Buddhist view, and you're thinking, what, is this a Buddhist text or not? Well, it is, because we all hold these views. We all hold these views to a certain degree. We're all materialists to some point, especially when it comes to past and future lives. We are. That's when we also stumble. That's why I'm saying this. We all have our doubts. If we didn't have doubts, we would work much harder for also our future lives. We wouldn't be so obsessed with this lifetime. If we were 100% convinced there's so much to come, this life we would step more, we wouldn't be as attached to this life's success, etc. It's nothing in comparison to what's to come. So this is why it's important. And I feel very passionate about past and future lives, especially because people have a hard time with it. That's why I think it's even more important. That's why I stress the technique of bodhicitta, not exchanging self with others. No, it's easy. Mothers, all sentient beings have been our mother. It's hard, that's why we need it. Okay? So, leaving aside that, I believe past and future lives. I've been studying now for a while. I've been translating and working on the Pramanavartika. Oh, the reasoning, it just needs to be a little bit changed, and the reasoning is so powerful in there. Now, what I think, what my claim is, we have a sense, really we have a sense, but intellectually we deny that. We do have a sense that my one moment of mind gives rise to a next moment of life, gives mind. We actually have that natural sense. We have that natural sense because we learn vocabulary, right? We memorize. And we feel, oh, if I memorize today, I will know tomorrow. Okay? So it's not like I'm putting something in my brain. The connection between the brain and the memorizing is the mind. That's the connection. It's not like I take an injection and let it go. Vocabulary. In my brain. Now I know it. That would be how you affect directly the brain. No, you're actually affecting the mind first. You're perceiving the words, you're experiencing the words, you see the words first of all, right? What sees the word? The brain? No. The brain does some chemical whatever, but what sees, what experiences the words is the mind. You see the words on the paper. It's not the brain, right? The brain is up here. It's shut, closed. Okay? It's your mind that perceives
You
them.
wouldn't have eyes.
Well, through the eyes, of course, but it's
Eyes
not.
are connected to the brain.
There's a
What can
touch.
we do?
No, you cannot see that.
Well, the thing is like, what's the connection between the brain? Like, what the brain perceives things?
Yes, of course.
How does it perceive things? It's just a chemical process.
Come on.
But that's just giving the qualities of the mind to the brain.
There's not even an understanding of sight. Even sight is not understood. The science doesn't know how to explain sight.
Anyway, I think like what the scientists, when they talk about the brain, they have a sense of perception and just kind of add that to the brain. Just kind of like everything is added to the brain. It takes on its own life, basically, right? And so, of course, in the end, very difficult to prove the opposite. But from a Buddhist point of view, what many of the neuroscientists talk of as brain is actually the mind. And what it was very convincing for me was once I saw this video of a neuroscientist who had meningitis, and he fell into a coma, and he was brain dead at the time. And he had this incredibly vivid experiences. And when he came back, he said, I know from my own experience, there is brain exists separately from mind. I experienced it myself. I was brain dead, but I had all these experiences. My brain wasn't working, but I had these experiences. So when my brain wasn't working, but I had these experiences, how do you account for that? But you have to be as lucky to fall into a coma with meningitis and have that kind of experience with your brain being dead. That's the only way. I can only prove that there's mind when I perceive my own mind. I don't even know you have a mind. I don't know whether you have a mind. I cannot know unless I have clairvoyance, which is really difficult to get, very hard to get. So as long as I don't have clairvoyance, I have no idea whether you have a mind or not. The only thing I can access is my own mind. But the example of this, you can Google it. It's like on YouTube.
Ibn Alexander.
Pardon?
Ibn Alexander.
His name is Ibn Alexander? Oh, you've seen it. Okay. Just Google Ibn Alexander. This person, his experience. Maybe he's just
He
lying.
had a near-death experience, a very strong near-death. He was hearing Om, and
No, he's not. He didn't hear Om. This guy didn't hear Om.
He was hearing
So is
choirs.
No. Anyway, just Google near-death experience. He'll come up. Right? But he could be lying. We could be lying. That's the
You're
problem.
just saying that we take so much effort in showing that there's no permanent self, but then we assume that there is permanent consciousness.
No.
I mean, philosophically.
No permanent consciousness. No permanent. Impermanent.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We just did this entire hour just talking about the first course to prove that there's no permanent self, but then we just assume that there is permanent consciousness. Impermanent. Sorry, that's my English. Due to our experience. It's like, if that's the logic for that, someone can come and say, I have an experience of a
No. Okay. Now, it's not about making you believe anything. Of course not. You can't. I mean, I can tell you anything. It has to make sense to you. That's the first thing. And then you need to experience it yourself. That's the only way. So, from a Buddhist point of view, faith can be helpful. Believing in something, but it needs to have two characteristics. It needs to be based on reasoning, and it must be temporary. Faith should only be there as long as you cannot know it yourself. Okay? Buddha doesn't have faith. Buddha knows. That's the Buddhist point of view. Of course, whether it's true or not. So, what we do here, I'm going through this book with you. So, actually, a step-by-step kind of procedure, if I had more time, you would actually, I would say, think of the Four Noble Truths. Think of them and come back and see whether they make sense to you. So actually, the real process, if you have enough time, would be you hear something, you meditate on it until you come to a first-hand experience. And then you come back, you hear the next. So that was like in the past, sometimes a student and his disciple, they had this relationship where the teacher said very little and said, meditate on it. Until the student came to a first-hand experience. Now, that's not helpful for anyone, because if the student tells me, I just realized we have their past and future lives, that's like telling a blind person, well, there is shape and color. However, whatever you call it, nano length or whatever, but there is shape and color. Well, or there's wavelength, whatever. But if you're blind since birth, then you can believe it, if you like, but only as long as you experience it yourself. So what we do in meditation, we open the mind to different ideas. We're very good at identifying sense objects, but we're helpless when it comes to the mind, because we never look. If you never look anywhere, you're not trained to recognize it, very naturally. So before I heard about mind, I had no idea what they were talking about. Mind, consciousness was a word that I didn't even know how to use properly. I had no sense of it. And then in Buddhism I met this, and I can say I experience my own mind. Only very briefly, only the coarsest types, but I'm convinced. Can I convince you? No. You can only look yourself. If you come to see it, you'll be convinced. If not, well, then not. Right? So it's not about forcing anything here with regard to the self. I'm assuming it's already all based. It's an advanced course, so it's already based on idea of consciousness. So if there is no, perhaps a perception, understanding of consciousness, no, through your own experience, then believe something would be sufficient, so just to be able to get an intellectual understanding. Unfortunately, or realistically, I don't think you walk away and you're like, whoa, got the self or the selflessness. It's not going to happen, right? It's very advanced. But study all this to know where this is leading us, to have a sense of the map. Right? And you're right, in terms of I can't prove anything. There's very little I can prove to you. And there's very little we actually know. We say, I know, I know, I know. We know of. There's very little we really know. There's very little we actually know. I know because it said so on Google. Right? I know the brain does everything because the neuroscientists say so. We don't even know that. We believe in that strongly. But we have no first-hand experience. And unless we've done all the logic, we don't even know that. We just believe it strongly. So we believe it. We have faith in that. I don't say you, but I say most people who just believe what the person with the fancy PhD tells us. It's like scientists are the new religious leaders. Previously, the rabbi told us, the priest told us, the lama told us, people believed it. That's not good. That's blind faith. Okay? Now we have blind faith because the scientist tells us. Yes?
I'm not sure if I understand why does it have to be either or? Why is this split between either mind or brain?
No. In Buddhism it's both.
But also in science it's both, okay? We're still learning. Also scientists say we don't know nothing. And there's a very long way to go.
I love that. That's what the scientists say. Yeah, but that's usually not what the lay people say.
I don't know what well, it's like, maybe it's like the materialists, okay? Maybe there's another tribe of materialists that we need to talk to. It's just, I'm sharing with the scientists I talk to, okay? That's all.
I know, of course. I can also just tell from my own experience, but trust me, I meet a lot of people who want to talk with me about Buddhism and tell me, well, we believe there's brain over mind. That's like, it's not even saying, there's some people who say we don't believe there's mind. There were a few scientists who did some tests on the meditators in Dharamsala, and I talked to one, and he's just one person, and he said, there is no mind, there's only brain. And then another person said, no, the mind is only a side effect of the brain. That was another person. And now over time I've heard, scientists have so many different views, so it's not surprising. But what I think is really interesting, and this is I'm just saying in general, that a lot of people nowadays, they read a scientist have said so, and then they believe it. they believe it, they take it on. And I'm not saying those are the scientists. The scientists themselves usually say, well, people give us too much credit. It's a theory. Okay? For instance, it's the theory of evolution. It's the theory of the Big Bang. It's called that. But a lot of people believe it's already 100% established.
So,
Right? So I'm just saying this. I'm just saying, so we criticize, and Buddhism criticizes blind faith. Blind faith is not a good idea.